The cameras were rolling. The audience was settled. Dr. Phil McGraw stood on his stage, mid-sentence, guiding a troubled family through one of the most difficult conversations of their lives. And then, without warning, a woman in the third row stood up. Her hand trembled as she raised it. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Dr. Phil, I need to tell you something." The studio went silent. Dr. Phil stopped. He turned toward her. And what happened next is something no one in that room, or watching at home, saw coming. It started as a routine taping. A family was there seeking help. A mother, Linda, 52, sat across from her adult son, Michael, 28. Between them was years of unresolved pain, broken trust, and a relationship that had deteriorated into silence. Linda claimed Michael had abandoned her after his father's death. Michael said his mother had blamed him for everything that went wrong in her life. They hadn't spoken in over 3 years. Dr. Phil was doing what he does best. Cutting through the noise, asking the hard questions, and forcing both sides to look at the truth they'd been avoiding. "Linda," Dr. Phil said, leaning forward, "you keep saying your son abandoned you. But I want you to tell me, what did you do to make him feel like he had no choice but to leave?" The question hung in the air. Linda's face tightened. She looked down at her hands. Michael shifted in his seat, his jaw clenched. The audience watched in silence. This was the moment. The moment where the mask would crack. Where the real story would begin to surface. But before Linda could answer, before the floodgates could open, a voice from the audience interrupted. "Dr. Phil." Every head turned. A woman in her late 40s, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and wearing a simple blue cardigan, was standing. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. Dr. Phil's expression changed instantly. He knew something was off. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He looked at the woman, then at his producers off camera, then back at her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "are you okay?" She shook her head. Tears began to fall. "I need to tell you something. About them. About this family." The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. Linda's face went pale. Michael sat frozen, his eyes locked on the woman in the audience. Dr. Phil didn't move. He just watched. Waiting. He could feel it. The weight of something bigger than a family argument. Something buried. Something dangerous. "Go ahead," he said softly. The woman took a shaky breath. "My name is Karen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm Linda's sister." The cameras zoomed in. The audience gasped. Linda's mouth opened but no sound came out. Michael's eyes widened. He looked at his mother, then at Karen, then back again. "You told me she was dead," he said, his voice hollow. Linda didn't respond. She just stared at Karen like she was seeing a ghost. Dr. Phil's face was stone. He turned to Linda. "Is that true?" Linda's lips trembled. "Dr. Phil, I can explain." "No!" He cut her off. His tone was firm. Not angry. Not judgmental. Just firm. "Not yet. Let her speak." He turned back to Karen. "How long has it been since you've seen your sister?" Karen wiped her eyes. 32 years. The number hit like a punch. 32 years. Over 3 decades of silence. Of lies. Of a relationship erased. Dr. Phil walked slowly toward Karen. He didn't speak. He just let the moment breathe. Let the weight of those words settle over the room. Then he asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why now? Why are you here today?" Karen looked at Linda. Then at Michael. Then at Dr. Phil. "Because I've been watching this family fall apart from a distance for years. And I can't stay silent anymore. Michael deserves to know the truth." Dr. Phil stopped walking. He stood in the center of the stage, between Karen and Linda, his hands folded in front of him. "What truth?" Karen's voice broke. "The truth about why his father really died." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The studio erupted. Not with noise, but with tension. A collective intake of breath. Michael stood up, his face flushed. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Linda was shaking her head violently. "Don't you dare!" she hissed at Karen. "Don't you dare do this!" Dr. Phil raised his hand. "Stop," he said. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone froze. "Karen," Dr. Phil said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Are you saying Linda lied about how her husband died?" Karen nodded. "He didn't have a heart attack. That's what she told everyone. That's what she told Michael. But that's not what happened." Michael's legs gave out. He sat back down hard, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "Then what happened?" he whispered. Karen looked at Dr. Phil, as if asking for permission. He nodded once. She took a deep breath. "He took his own life." The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy. Suffocating. Michael's face crumbled. Linda buried her face in her hands. The audience was motionless. Dr. Phil closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. He walked over to Michael and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. Then he turned to Linda. "Is this true?" Linda was sobbing now. Deep, guttural sobs that shook her entire body. She couldn't speak. She just nodded. Dr. Phil didn't push. He let her cry. Let her sit with the truth she'd been running from for so long. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Linda, why did you lie to your son about how his father died?" She looked up at him, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Because I couldn't. I couldn't let him know. I couldn't let anyone know." "Know what?" "That it was my fault." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He turned to the cameras and said, "Stop the tape." The red lights on the cameras went dark. The crew looked at each other in confusion. This never happened. Dr. Phil never stopped the taping. But he did. Because this wasn't about television anymore. This was about a family in crisis. And he needed to handle it differently. He walked over to Linda and knelt down beside her chair. Not as a host. Not as Dr. Phil. As a human being. "Linda," he said gently, "nothing that happened is your fault. Do you understand me?" "Nothing." She shook her head. "You don't know what I did. Then tell me." She looked at him, her eyes full of pain and shame. "We had a fight. The night before he died. I told him I wanted a divorce. I told him I didn't love him anymore. And the next morning, he was gone." Her voice broke on the last word. Dr. Phil didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He stayed right there, his hand on hers. "And you've been carrying that guilt for how many years?" 28. She whispered. Dr. Phil stood up slowly. He looked at Karen, then at Michael, then back at Linda. "Do you know why your sister is here today?" Linda shook her head. "Because she loves you," Dr. Phil said. "And she's been watching you destroy yourself, and your son, for 3 decades because you couldn't forgive yourself for something that wasn't your fault." He turned to Michael. "Your father made a choice. A tragic, devastating choice. But it was his choice. Not your mother's. Not yours. His." Michael was crying now. Silent tears streaming down his face. "Why didn't she just tell me?" "Because she was ashamed," Dr. Phil said. "Because she thought if you knew the truth, you'd hate her. So she pushed you away first. She made you think she blamed you, because it was easier than admitting she blamed herself." Dr. Phil walked back to the center of the stage. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. "Linda," he said, "before we started taping today, Karen gave this to one of my producers. She asked me to give it to you at the right moment. I think now is that moment." He handed the envelope to Linda. Her hands shook as she took it. She stared at it for a long moment, then slowly opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Faded. Creased. Worn from being carried for years. It was a picture of Linda and Karen as children, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "Sisters forever. No matter what." Linda broke. Not in pieces. In waves. She clutched the photo to her chest and sobbed. Karen stood up from her seat in the audience and walked toward the stage. Dr. Phil stepped aside. The two sisters met in the middle. And for the first time in 32 years, they held each other. The audience was in tears. The crew was wiping their eyes. Even the hardest, most experienced producers in the room couldn't hold it together. And Dr. Phil just stood there, watching. Letting them have this moment. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Just witness. Just be present. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Michael stood up. He walked over to his mother and his aunt. And he wrapped his arms around both of them. The three of them stood there, crying, holding each other like they were the only people in the world. Dr. Phil stepped back. He let them have their moment. And when they finally pulled apart, when they finally caught their breath, he spoke. "Linda, I want you to hear me very clearly. What happened to your husband was not your fault. A fight does not cause someone to take their own life. Mental illness does. Depression does. Pain that goes untreated does. You did not do this." She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "And Michael," Dr. Phil turned to him, "your mother has been drowning in guilt and shame for almost 3 decades. And instead of reaching out, she pushed you away because she thought she didn't deserve your love. But she does. And she needs it now more than ever." Dr. Phil looked at Karen. "And you? You could have walked away. You could have let this family destroy itself. But you didn't. You showed up. You told the truth. And you gave them a chance to heal." He paused. "That takes courage." He turned back to Linda. "I'm going to recommend you work with a trauma therapist who specializes in grief and loss. And I'm going to make sure you get the support you need. Because healing doesn't happen in one conversation. It happens over time, with the right tools and the right people." He looked at Michael. "And you need to decide if you're ready to forgive your mother. Not for her. For you. Because holding on to anger and resentment will only destroy you from the inside out." Dr. Phil walked back to his chair and sat down. He looked directly into the camera. "If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please reach out. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. You are not alone. And your life matters." He paused. "And if you're carrying guilt or shame over something that happened in your past, I want you to hear what I told Linda today. It's not your fault. And you deserve to heal." The cameras started rolling again. The red lights came back on. Dr. Phil looked at the family sitting in front of him. "So here's what we're going to do," he said. "We're going to take a break. And then we're going to sit down, off camera, and talk about what happens next. About therapy. About healing. About rebuilding your relationship. Because that's what this is really about. Not the television show. Not the audience. It's about you. And making sure you have the tools you need to move forward." He stood up. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. And thank you, Karen, for having the courage to speak up." The audience stood up and applauded. Not the polite, obligatory applause that happens at the end of every show. Real applause. The kind that comes from the heart. The kind that says, "We see you. We hear you. And we're with you." Dr. Phil shook hands with Linda, Michael, and Karen. He hugged each of them. And then, as the cameras faded to black, he walked off the stage. But before he left, he turned back one more time. "Remember," he said, looking directly at the camera, "it's never too late to tell the truth. And it's never too late to heal. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The aftermath of that taping became one of the most talked about moments in the show's history. Linda enrolled in intensive therapy the following week. Michael joined her for family counseling sessions. Karen moved back to the same city where Linda lived, and the two sisters began the long process of rebuilding what had been lost for over 3 decades. 6 months later, they returned to the show for a follow-up. The transformation was visible. Linda's eyes were brighter. Michael sat closer to his mother. Karen held her sister's hand throughout the entire conversation. Dr. Phil asked them the question everyone wanted to know. "What's different now?" Linda spoke first. "I'm not running anymore. I spent 30 years running from the truth, and all it did was destroy the people I loved most. Now I face it. Every single day. And it's hard. But it's honest." Michael nodded. "I have my mom back. The real one. Not the one who was hiding behind guilt and anger. And I have an aunt I never knew existed. It doesn't erase what happened, but it gives us a chance to move forward." Dr. Phil leaned back in his chair. "You know what I've learned doing this show for over 20 years? That secrets don't protect people. They destroy them. And the moment you choose honesty over hiding, that's when real healing begins." He looked directly at the camera one more time. "If you're carrying something heavy, something you think is too shameful to speak out loud, I want you to know, you're not alone. And there are people who will help you carry it. You just have to be brave enough to ask." The envelope with the childhood photograph sits framed in Linda's living room now. A reminder. Not of what was lost, but of what was found. And every time Michael visits his mother, he sees it. And he remembers the day everything changed. The day his aunt stood up in that audience. The day Dr. Phil stopped the cameras. The day the truth finally set them free.